You check your blood sugar after dinner and the number staring back at you makes your stomach drop. 237. You ate carefully. You avoided the bread basket. You chose grilled fish instead of pasta. You did everything you thought you were supposed to do. And still the number climbed to a place that frightens you. You feel betrayed by your own body, confused about what you did wrong, anxious about what this means for your future. You wonder if anything you do actually matters, or if this disease is simply going to progress no matter what choices you make. Tomorrow morning you'll wake up and check again, hoping the number has fallen overnight, dreading the possibility that it has not. You will make breakfast decisions based on fear rather than understanding. You will move through your day with a low hum of worry that never quite disappears. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question will circle endlessly. What am I supposed to do when my blood sugar is high? Not in general terms, not the advice your doctor gave you months ago that you have already tried, but right now, today, when the number is elevated and you need it to come down. This is what I want to show you, not vague recommendations about lifestyle changes, not the same generic advice you have heard 100 times. I want to give you 5 specific actions in a specific order that work together to bring elevated blood sugar down. Each action targets a different mechanism, a different piece of the puzzle, and together they create an effect that no single intervention could achieve alone. Because here is what most people do not understand about blood sugar. It is not a simple problem with a simple solution. It is a multi-factor problem that requires a multi-factor response. Let me explain what is actually happening inside your body when blood sugar stays elevated. Because understanding the mechanism changes how you approach the solution. Your blood sugar rises when glucose enters your bloodstream faster than it can exit. This seems obvious, but the implications are profound. Most people focus only on what goes in, the food they eat, the carbohydrates they consume. But glucose comes from multiple sources, and it leaves through multiple pathways, and a problem at any point in the system can result in elevated numbers. Glucose enters your blood from digestion, yes. When you eat carbohydrates, they break down into glucose and enter your bloodstream. But your liver also produces glucose constantly, releasing it into circulation to fuel your brain and maintain blood sugar between meals. This hepatic glucose output is supposed to decrease after you eat, when incoming glucose from food makes additional liver production unnecessary. In insulin resistance, this regulation fails. The liver continues pumping glucose into your blood even when you have just eaten, adding to the glucose arriving from your meal. 2 streams converge instead of one replacing the other. Meanwhile, on the exit side, glucose is supposed to leave your blood by entering cells. Muscle cells should absorb glucose to fuel movement. Fat cells should take up glucose for storage. The liver should capture excess glucose and store it as glycogen. All of this requires insulin signaling. Insulin is the key that unlocks cell doors to allow glucose entry. When your cells become resistant to insulin, when they no longer respond efficiently to its signal, the doors remain partially closed. Glucose accumulates in the blood because it cannot get into the cells where it belongs. This is why high blood sugar is not simply about eating too much sugar, it is about a traffic jam. Glucose trying to enter cells but finding the doors locked, the liver adding more glucose when it should be stopping, the entire system congested because the signaling that coordinates it has broken down. Any strategy that addresses only one piece of this problem will produce limited results. You need to pull multiple levers simultaneously, opening different pathways, reducing different inputs, calming different hormones that interfere with the process. The 5 actions I'm about to share each target a different lever. None of them alone is magical. Together, they create a synergy that addresses the multi-factor nature of elevated blood sugar. And the order matters because each action creates conditions that make the next action more effective. The first thing you should do when your blood sugar is elevated is move your body. This is not about burning calories. This is about activating a mechanism that exists specifically for situations like this. A pathway that allows glucose to enter muscle cells without requiring insulin at all. When your muscles contract, they become hungry for fuel. This contraction-induced glucose uptake operates through a different channel than insulin-mediated uptake. It bypasses the locked doors entirely. The muscle opens an alternative entrance, one that does not need the key that your resistant cells have stopped recognizing. This is why exercise works even in people with severe insulin resistance. The muscles can still absorb glucose when they are working, even when they ignore insulin signals at rest. You do not need intense exercise to activate this mechanism. A simple walk triggers it. 10 or 15 minutes of movement after a meal can significantly blunt the glucose spike that would otherwise occur. The effect is not instantaneous in the way that medication might be, but it operates continuously while you move and continues for hours afterward as your muscles replenish their fuel stores. The insulin sensitivity of your muscles actually increases following exercise, meaning they become temporarily more responsive to insulin even after you stop moving. For people who cannot walk easily, who have mobility limitations or are stuck at a desk, there is an alternative worth knowing about. Your soleus muscle, a large muscle in your calf, can be activated while seated simply by raising your heels off the floor repeatedly, pressing through your toes as if you were standing on tiptoe, then lowering back down. This simple movement, performed repeatedly over time, engages one of your largest muscles and triggers the same glucose uptake mechanism that walking provides. It is not a replacement for full-body movement, but it is available to anyone who can move their feet, even while sitting in a meeting or watching television. Reframe your expectations about timing. The glucose number on your meter may not plummet dramatically in the next 30 minutes just because you took a walk. But the physiological effect is happening. Glucose is entering muscles that moments ago were refusing it. The traffic jam is easing. The benefit accumulates over time, and if you make movement your consistent response to elevated readings, the cumulative effect over weeks and months can be substantial. The second action is hydration, and its importance is often underestimated. When blood sugar is high, your body tries to dilute and eliminate the excess glucose through increased urination. This is why frequent urination is a classic symptom of uncontrolled diabetes. Your kidneys work overtime to filter glucose from your blood and flush it out. But this process loses water too. You become progressively dehydrated as your body sacrifices fluid to manage the glucose emergency. Dehydration concentrates your blood. When blood volume decreases, the same amount of glucose exists in a smaller volume of fluid, making the measured concentration appear higher. You check your blood sugar and see a number that partly reflects not how much glucose is present, but how little water is available to dilute it. Drinking water does not flush sugar out of your body in any direct sense. What it does is restore proper blood volume, support kidney function, and allow the numbers to reflect actual glucose status rather than glucose plus dehydration. There is also a hormonal connection that most people never hear about. A hormone called vasopressin, which regulates water balance in the body, has been linked in research to impaired glucose regulation. When you are chronically underhydrated, vasopressin levels rise, and this elevation appears to interfere with normal metabolic function. Staying properly hydrated may support better glucose control through this hormonal pathway, as well as through the simpler mechanical effects on blood volume. Water alone will not cure insulin resistance, but dehydration actively makes glucose management harder. When you address hydration, you remove a burden from your system and allow the other interventions to work more effectively. Think of it as clearing interference from a signal. The signal still needs to be sent and received correctly, but at least now there is no static distorting it. Drink water consistently throughout the day, not just when you feel thirsty. Thirst is a lagging indicator. By the time you feel it, you're already somewhat dehydrated. Keep water accessible. Take sips regularly. The body is largely water, the blood is largely water. The biochemical reactions that regulate glucose occur in an aqueous environment. Maintaining that environment supports everything else you're trying to accomplish. The third action involves food, but not in the way you might expect. When blood sugar is high, the instinct is often to stop eating, to skip meals, to give your body a break from incoming glucose. This logic seems sound, but misunderstands what happens in insulin resistance when you fast. When you do not eat, your body still needs fuel. Your brain alone requires a constant supply of glucose to function. Where does this fuel come from if you're not eating? From your liver. Your liver stores glucose in the form of glycogen and releases it between meals to maintain blood sugar. It can also manufacture new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources through a process called gluconeogenesis. When you fast, these processes ramp up to compensate for the absence of incoming food. In a healthy metabolism, insulin signals the liver to reduce glucose output after meals and to moderate its production during fasting. But in insulin resistance, the liver does not hear this signal clearly. It produces more glucose than necessary, dumps it into your blood, and the resulting elevation can be paradoxically worsened by not eating. Stress hormones like cortisol and glucagon, which rise during fasting, further stimulate the liver to release glucose. You skip a meal expecting your blood sugar to fall, and instead it rises because your liver interprets the absence of food as a signal to generate emergency fuel. This does not mean you should eat without care. What you eat matters enormously. The goal is to choose foods that support insulin signaling rather than further impair it. Research consistently points toward whole plant foods, particularly those high in fiber and low in saturated fat, as beneficial for insulin sensitivity. Fiber slows the absorption of glucose from digestion, preventing the sharp spikes that overwhelm an already struggling system. The reduction in saturated fat intake has been associated in studies with decreased fat accumulation in liver and muscle cells, the very accumulation that contributes to insulin resistance in the first place. There is a concept here that often gets lost in debates about diet. Some people believe that carbohydrates themselves are the problem, that avoiding them is the solution, that someone with elevated blood sugar should never eat bread or rice or potatoes again. But carbohydrate intolerance is a symptom of insulin resistance, not evidence that carbohydrates are inherently harmful. Healthy populations around the world eat high carbohydrate diets and maintain excellent glucose control because their cells respond appropriately to insulin. The goal is not to permanently restrict carbohydrates, but to restore the cellular environment in which carbohydrates can be processed normally. Eating strategically means choosing foods that help rather than hinder this restoration. It means including fiber-rich vegetables, legumes, and whole grains that slow glucose absorption. It means reducing the saturated fat that accumulates in cells and blocks insulin signaling. It means eating at regular intervals to avoid the stress hormone surges that come with prolonged fasting. It means feeding your body in a way that tells it the emergency is over, that resources are available, that the desperate glucose production of the liver can stand down. The fourth action addresses something that rarely appears on lists of blood sugar management techniques, even though its influence is profound. Your stress level directly affects your glucose. This is not metaphor or psychology, this is biochemistry. When you experience stress, whether physical or psychological, your body initiates a cascade of hormonal responses designed to prepare you for danger. Among these responses is the release of glucose into the bloodstream, fuel for the fight or flight muscles that your body believes are about to be needed. Your liver does not know whether the danger is a tiger or a tax deadline. It responds to stress hormones the same way regardless of source. Cortisol rises, glucagon rises, and the liver obediently dumps glucose into your blood. You have not eaten anything. You're sitting at your desk or lying in bed worrying, and your blood sugar climbs because your body is preparing for a physical emergency that exists only in your nervous system's interpretation of your thoughts. This mechanism made sense when stress meant imminent physical danger. The glucose would be used immediately by muscles engaged in running or fighting. In modern life, stress is often chronic and psychological, with no physical outlet for the glucose that gets released. It accumulates in your blood, contributes to elevated readings, and compounds the metabolic dysfunction that was already present. Calming your nervous system genuinely lowers blood sugar. This is not wishful thinking. The parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode that opposes the fight or flight response, actively reduces cortisol output and suppresses the liver's emergency glucose production. When you activate this calming state, you are sending a signal to your entire metabolic system that the emergency is over, that survival responses can be dialed back, that normal regulation can resume. Simple breathing techniques offer immediate access to this parasympathetic state. Slow, deep breaths, particularly those where the exhale is longer than the inhale, stimulate the vagus nerve and shift your nervous system toward calm. A few minutes of this breathing, performed genuinely and with attention, can measurably reduce cortisol levels. You're not just relaxing your mind. You're changing the hormonal environment in which your glucose regulation operates. Consider the implications for chronic stress. If you live in a constant state of low-level anxiety, your liver is constantly receiving signals to produce glucose for emergencies. Your blood sugar is chronically elevated not because of what you eat, but because of how you feel. Addressing the stress through whatever means work for you, breathing practices, meditation, time in nature, resolution of the situations causing stress, becomes a genuine metabolic intervention, not just a wellness luxury. The fifth action is tracking, specifically tracking your fasting glucose over time, to understand what is actually happening and to escape the emotional reactivity that single readings produce. Fasting glucose, the number you see when you check first thing in the morning before eating, reflects primarily what your liver did overnight. While you slept, your liver was supposed to release glucose at a controlled rate to maintain blood sugar in a healthy range. If your fasting glucose is elevated, it suggests your liver is overproducing glucose, which typically indicates insulin resistance at the liver level. The liver is not hearing insulin's signal to reduce output. A single fasting glucose reading tells you very little. These numbers vary day to day based on sleep quality, stress, what you ate the night before, how hydrated you were, and numerous other factors. But the trend over time tells you something important. Are your fasting numbers generally decreasing over weeks and months? Then whatever you are doing is working. Are they stable or climbing? Then something needs to change. This data-driven approach removes emotion from the equation. Instead of panicking at every high reading or despairing when a number surprises you, you look for patterns. You notice that your fasting glucose tends to be higher after poor sleep or after evenings when you ate late. You notice it improves during periods when you are more active or less stressed. The numbers become information rather than judgment, feedback rather than failure. Tracking also prevents the exhausting cycle of daily firefighting. Without data over time, every elevated reading feels like a crisis requiring immediate response. You swing from one dietary intervention to another, never giving any approach enough time to demonstrate its effect. You react to numbers instead of understanding trends. When you track consistently, you gain perspective. You see that a single high reading is not a disaster, that the direction matters more than any individual point, that your biology changes gradually in response to consistent strategy, rather than frantically in response to occasional panic. Now let me connect all of this back to the underlying concept that makes it coherent. Each of the 5 actions I have described targets a different aspect of the glucose traffic jam. Movement opens an alternative pathway for glucose to exit the blood and enter muscles. Hydration removes a confounding factor that artificially concentrates glucose and stresses the system. Strategic eating provides nutrients that support insulin signaling while avoiding triggers that worsen resistance. Stress reduction calms the hormonal signals that tell the liver to produce excess glucose. Tracking provides the information necessary to understand whether your interventions are working over time. No single one of these actions is sufficient alone. Someone who exercises but eats poorly and remains chronically stressed will see limited benefit. Someone who eats perfectly but never moves and stays dehydrated will not achieve optimal results. Someone who does everything right physically but ignores the psychological dimension may find their numbers stubbornly elevated despite their best efforts. The system is interconnected. The solution must be integrated. This is the difference between managing diabetes and addressing insulin resistance. Managing diabetes means reacting to numbers, chasing each reading with whatever intervention seems appropriate in the moment, fighting the same battle repeatedly without changing the underlying conditions. Addressing insulin resistance means changing the cellular environment so that insulin signaling improves, so that glucose can move where it needs to go, so that the liver moderates its output appropriately, so that the entire system functions the way it was designed to function. Insulin resistance is not a permanent condition for most people. It develops over years through a combination of dietary patterns, activity levels, stress, sleep, and other factors. It can be reversed through addressing those same factors. The cells that are currently ignoring insulin can become responsive again when the conditions that caused their resistance are changed. This does not happen quickly. It happens gradually, over months and years of consistent behavior change. But it happens, the biology can change. This is the empowering reframe that makes everything else possible. The blood sugar number on your meter is not a judgment. It is not a measure of your worth or your discipline or your moral character. It is feedback. It is information about what is happening inside your body right now, today, in response to everything you have done and experienced recently. That information can be used to make adjustments, to identify what works and what does not, to gradually steer your metabolism toward healthier patterns. Fear makes blood sugar management harder. When you approach elevated readings with panic, with shame, with the belief that you have failed, your stress hormones rise and your blood sugar climbs further. When you approach the same readings with curiosity, with the understanding that this is data to be analysed rather than verdict to be suffered, you remain calmer and your body cooperates more readily. Restriction alone is not the answer. Eliminating every food that might raise blood sugar, living in constant vigilance about what you can and cannot eat, creates a psychological burden that often produces the very stress that worsens glucose control. The goal is not to live in fear of food. The goal is to understand how food interacts with your current metabolic state and to make choices that move you toward improvement. As insulin sensitivity is restored, food choices that once spiked your blood sugar may become tolerable again. You're not condemned to a forever diminished diet. You're working toward a metabolism that handles food normally. Let me give you the 5 actions again in order so you have them clearly. First, move. When blood sugar is elevated, engage your muscles. Walk if you can. Do seated heel raises if you cannot. Activate the contraction-induced glucose uptake pathway that bypasses insulin resistance and allows muscles to absorb glucose directly. Second, hydrate. Drink water to restore blood volume, support kidney function, and eliminate the concentrating effect of dehydration on your measured glucose levels. Address the vasopressin dynamics that link poor hydration to impaired glucose regulation. Third, eat strategically. Do not skip meals in hopes that fasting will lower blood sugar. Eat whole, fiber-rich plant foods that slow glucose absorption and reduce the saturated fat that contributes to cellular insulin resistance. Feed your body so it knows the emergency is over, and the liver can moderate its glucose output. Fourth, calm your nervous system. Use breathing techniques, meditation, or whatever methods work for you to activate the parasympathetic state and reduce the stress hormones that tell your liver to produce emergency glucose. Recognize that psychological stress has direct metabolic consequences. Fifth, track your fasting glucose over time. Look for trends rather than reacting to individual readings. Use the data to identify patterns, assess what is working, and remove the emotional charge from numbers that are simply information about your current state. Perform these actions in this order, because each one creates conditions that support the next. Movement immediately begins lowering blood glucose and improving insulin sensitivity. Hydration ensures that the changes you are producing are accurately reflected in your measurements. Strategic eating prevents the reactive liver glucose output that fasting can trigger, while providing nutrients that support further improvement. Stress reduction prevents the hormonal override that can sabotage everything else. And tracking gives you the perspective to understand whether your combined efforts are producing results over time. The mindset shift underneath all of this is perhaps the most important element. You are not fragile. Your metabolism is not broken beyond repair. You're not doomed to progressive deterioration no matter what you do. You have a condition that responds to intervention. You have levers you can pull that genuinely affect the outcome. The power is not entirely in your doctor's hands or in pharmaceutical laboratories. It is partly in your own hands, in the choices you make every day, in the actions you take when numbers are elevated, in the consistency you bring to an integrated approach. The number will not always cooperate immediately. Some days you will do everything right and still see an elevated reading because the body is complex and responds to factors beyond your control. Do not let those days defeat you. The trend over time is what matters. The gradual improvement in fasting glucose over months. The slowly increasing insulin sensitivity that comes from sustained behavioral change. The morning 6 months from now when you check your blood sugar and it falls within a range that seemed impossible when you started. This is available to you. Not through any single miraculous intervention, but through the patient, consistent application of multiple strategies that address multiple mechanisms. Your blood sugar is elevated because several things are going wrong simultaneously. It will normalize when you address those things together, pulling the levers that open pathways for glucose to exit, that moderate the liver's inappropriate production, that calm the hormonal storms that override normal regulation. The traffic jam can clear. The doors that insulin could not open can be bypassed or gradually unlocked. The liver that ignored stop signals can learn to hear them again. The stress response that flooded your blood with emergency fuel can be calmed into recognizing that no emergency exists. All of this is possible. All of this happens for people who commit to the integrated approach and sustain it long enough for biology to respond. You checked your blood sugar after dinner, and the number frightened you. That fear is understandable. But fear alone does not lower glucose. Action does. Understanding does. The systematic application of interventions that target different aspects of the problem does. You now know what to do and why each action matters. The next step is yours. Move your body, drink your water, eat foods that support rather than sabotage your insulin signaling. Breathe deeply and let your nervous system know that the emergency is over. Track your progress over time so you can see the improvement that individual readings might obscure. Your blood sugar is not your enemy. It is a messenger. It is telling you something about the current state of your metabolism, something you can use to guide your actions and measure your progress. Listen to the message without being overwhelmed by it. Respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. Trust that consistent effort over time produces biological change. The number that frightened you tonight can be different a month from now, 3 months from now, a year from now. The path between here and there runs through the 5 actions I have described, performed consistently, in order, with the understanding that you are addressing a system rather than fighting a symptom. Begin now. Your metabolism is waiting for the signals that tell it things have changed.